Not too long ago, I published a video on whether or not Joel was right to save Ellie at the end of Naughty Dog's The Last of Us. And in that specific video, I chose to tackle the question of Joel's moral rightness or wrongness on the presupposition that the Fireflies could have and would have produced a functioning vaccine. I chose to accept that premise because of the narrative structure's reliance on said proposition being true. And to my shock, I found out that some people didn't seem to have an adequate understanding of the very piece of fiction they claim to be fans of. But to be fair to those individuals, The Last of Us isn't a perfect work of art, and it does contain some glaring flaws as a story that could very easily cause individuals to misinterpret its narrative. That being said, I want to spend some time explaining why the narrative of The Last of Us relies on the in-universe premise, which posits that the Fireflies could have and would have made a vaccine had Ellie been sacrificed in the operating room. Now, before I do this, I'd like to clarify that if we were to take everything in this story as hyper-literal as possible, then we would have plenty of reasons to justify a lack of belief in the Fireflies' ability to produce a functional vaccine. They clearly did not have the proper resources, equipment, and human capital to realistically get the job done. At least not with what the story has shown us. But the story of The Last of Us isn't real life. It is a work of fiction. Accepting certain fictions in a fictional story is key to the functionality of the story itself. This is what is known as the suspension of disbelief. Take, for example, the very concept of the cordyceps fungus jumping to humans as an example straight from the game. Truth be told, it just isn't happening the way it was presented in the story. Not in real life, at least. But we accept this outlandish claim because it is central to the narrative of the story being told, just as we believed that Joel could survive falling from a balcony onto a metal rebar pole, which pierced his fucking abdomen. In real life, he would have bled out by the time Ellie got him to safety. He also would have likely experienced vertebral fractures, rib fractures, severe damage to his arms, and even the potential puncture of his lungs, accompanied by the warm embrace of internal bleeding. Now notice how no one really complains about this. Surely some people may mention it, but they don't then justify it to claim that Joel has Terminator levels of durability and resilience that would have allowed him to survive Abby beating him with a golf club. Ironically enough, the HBO adaptation realized how unrealistic this was and they changed it. And they also did this because the change wasn't crucial to the plot. With that being said, my point is that the vaccine's production doesn't have to be realistically possible for us to accept it as possible within the universe of the story being told. So what narrative evidence do we have within the story to believe that the Fireflies could have produced the vaccine? Well, the narrative doesn't explicitly state it to us, but we can see that no one in the story doubts the Fireflies' ability to make the vaccine. Now, plenty of people do voice their doubts over their ability to defeat Fedra, but no one really goes as far as to suggest that the vaccine could not be made.
I owed the Fireflies.
What?
Look, they're basically all dead. We can just go in there, finish them off. We get the guns. What do you say?
How do we know you got them? Well, I hear the military's been wiping you guys out. So where were you heading?
Heard the Fireflies are based out west somewhere. We're gonna join up with them. Something funny?
Oh, it just seems like there's a lot of people putting their stock on the Fireflies these days.
Yeah, maybe there's a reason for that.
So you don't know where they are, and you're just gonna drag him across the country to find them?
I tell you what, how about I worry about my brother, you worry about your girl.
Easy. We're looking for the Fireflies, too. She's immune.
Immune to what?
I've seen her, I know, I've seen her breathe enough spores to take down a dozen men. Nothing. Now, I wouldn't have believed it neither, but I can show you.
All right.
I bring you the cure from mankind, and you want to play the pissy little brother?
The only doubt expressed over the vaccine's potential creation we ever get is from Joel when he is actively lying to Ellie. Joel, in all actuality, actually believes that they can make the vaccine. For example, he doesn't ask Marlene if the vaccine is actually possible, but rather he asks her to find someone else.
It's why she's immune. Once they remove it, they'll be able to reverse engineer a vaccine. A vaccine.
But it grows all over the brain.
It does.
Find someone else.
There is no one else.
So you were gonna show me where she...
He also admits that the Fireflies were going to make a vaccine to his brother, who's the only person he's told the truth to at that point in the story.
He found the Firefly. Because of her, they were actually gonna make a cure. The only catch, it would kill her.
Jerry, the surgeon and the would-be vaccine maker, also expresses full confidence in his ability to produce a vaccine from Ellie's brain tissue, and Marlene never once doubts him, but rather questions the morality behind the procedure itself.
She's a child, not some petri dish.
You think I don't... I'm aware of the situation.
And you're okay with killing her?
No, I'm okay with developing a vaccine that'll help save millions of lives. How many Fireflies have died for less?
That was their choice.
All of that is justified with this one act.
If this was your daughter, what would you do?
Apparently, some viewers in the comments still believed in the myth that apparently the first game contained recordings which declared that Ellie wasn't the only immune person. But this simply isn't the case.
April 28th. Marlene was right. The girl's infection is like nothing I've ever seen. The cause of her immunity is uncertain. As we've seen in all past cases, the antigenic titers of the patient's cordyceps remain high in both the serum and the cerebrospinal fluid. Blood cultures taken from the patient rapidly grow cordyceps and fungal media in the lab. However, white blood cell lines, including percentages and absolute counts, are completely normal. There is no elevation of pro-inflammatory cytokines, and an MRI of the brain shows no evidence of fungal growth in the limbic regions, which would normally accompany the prodrome of aggression in infected patients. We must find a way to replicate this state under laboratory conditions. We're about to hit a milestone in human history equal to the discovery of penicillin. After years of wandering in circles, we're about to come home, make a difference, and bring the human race back into control of its own destiny. All of our sacrifices and the hundreds of men and women who've bled for this cause, or worse, will not be in vain.
The tape in question is comparing Ellie, who is technically infected, to other infected persons. Then the tape goes out of its way to say that Ellie is indeed the path to salvation, because she is quite literally unlike everyone else, being the only infected person who was literally immune to the fungal infection. It's basic reading comprehension, really. That being said, there are even people who think that in-game recordings claimed that a vaccine was a quote long shot. Yet none of these recordings actually say that, and they're all fucking available online for free. Why do some of you people speak with such authority without ever doing at least 5 minutes of research? Like, guys, I can't express this enough. This is literal Dunning-Kruger behavior. You can't get mad at me for accurately highlighting your failures. Just think before you comment. The fact that these myths and misconceptions continue to exist is somewhat mind-boggling to me, because it really just goes to show you that people are more interested in validation and not truth, which is probably why echo chambers are so prevalent on social media sites. You know, where algorithms are designed to give you more of what you want. Anyways, the reason people care about the logistical oversights and medical mistakes presented in the story is because they want a way to justify the actions taken by Joel. It's not deep or insightful. Be that as it may, the ending of the first game presents us with a heavily modified version of the trolley problem. Some people seemingly disagree with the notion that the ending presents viewers with a trolley problem of some sort. But fact of the matter is, this is a classic trolley problem at its core. Ellie is tied to one set of tracks. The rest of humanity is tied to the other set. And Joel has his hand on the lever. Choosing Ellie causes a metaphorical trolley to sentence countless persons to avoidable deaths. Choosing mankind will cost Ellie's life, with the trolley representing Ellie accepting the fate of mankind for the salvation of mankind, meaning she dies so that we may live via the procurement of a vaccine born from her blood sacrifice. In a weird way, if she died, that would make her a Christ figure, wouldn't it? Which is a very common literary trope. That said, by the time Joel arrives to the lever, the trolley is racing towards Ellie, and he makes the choice to pull the lever and damn humanity, all in order to save Ellie, his surrogate daughter. No matter what you may believe, this is a fucking trolley problem. Period. The game relies on this problem in order to have the impact that it does at the end. If the vaccine isn't likely to work, then there is no real moral dilemma to begin with. A trolley problem without a trolley is not a fucking trolley problem. The story hence devolves into something that is akin to Taken, but with zombies instead of Algerian sex traffickers. Now, I'm not saying that Taken isn't a fun movie, but I think it's clear that Naughty Dog and Neil Druckmann were attempting to craft a story that was a bit more nuanced and morally complex than a simple dad saves daughter from bad people story. Suffice it to say, the story relies on the Fireflies' ability to actually create the vaccine. Hence, we must suspend our disbelief in order to accept that assumption if we truly wish to engage with the story as intended. The vaccine is a literal narrative necessity, thus rendering the possibility of its creation a complete certainty. Now, some would foolishly argue that we can just ignore the original intent of the story's narrative by appealing to the literary theory of the death of the author, but I'll cover that later in this video. But before we move on, I just want to quickly show you this clip of Craig Mazin confirming that the story's ending is indeed a trolley problem.
And this is the trolley problem writ large. People have been talking about this forever. And the truth is that if your goal is to save as many human lives as possible, if that is what you believe is the morally correct thing to do, then Marlene is making the right choice.
Break some eggs.
But that is why the trolley problem is a problem.
Yeah.
It's, you know what I mean? And people have been debating the end of The Last of Us since it came out 10 years ago. And I can only assume that people are debating it now. I know
Setting all of that aside, Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin have both made some public statements that help to bolster the claim that I am making regarding the intended narrative of the story. The reason I am including Craig Mazin is because the HBO adaptation, which Neil Druckmann was also a co-creator of, has the same exact ending and overarching plot as the original game. The changes made by HBO are in service to the narrative and not actual changes to the core plot. That being said, I want to start off with a quote from Neil Druckmann that predates the HBO adaptation. This quote comes from an interview conducted in 2013 from Kotaku.
As for the whole ending, I've heard you talk in your review about how some of the plot points are cliched, and the one that probably bugs us the most is Ellie being immune. And the only reason that's in there is so you could get that choice at the end. There's this progression of character for Joel, and how far is he willing to go for Ellie? It progresses from willing to put his life on the line, willing to put his friends on the line, and eventually he's willing to put his soul on the line, and he's willing to sacrifice all of humanity. And at the end, you could argue that last conversation, he's even willing to put his relationship with Ellie on the line in order to protect her. So that was always there for that specific purpose. It was never there because we're interested in saving the world or curing mankind. It was just to get the progression of his character, or rather, the progression of both characters, because it becomes really interesting for Ellie at the end there too.
What this quote essentially admits is that Ellie's immunity and the creation of a vaccine was crucial for the story's narrative, especially for Joel's character, where he's willing to burn his soul and the world to save the one he loves. Druckmann isn't outright stating it, as he wants us to view the story as somehow being ambiguous, but for Joel to be willing to damn the world for Ellie, the world must actually be at risk of damnation as a result of his actions. If the vaccine was never going to work, then he isn't really condemning mankind to 1,000 years of darkness, nor is he burning his soul for Ellie, because the very act of saving Ellie would be easy to morally justify. You see, ladies and gents, the devil really is in the details. Druckmann then went on to state in 2023 the following quote,
Sometimes when you love something unconditionally, logic goes out the window and you will do really horrible things to protect the ones you love. And there's a lot of examples worldwide of this happening all the time. So for us, it was just like, okay, here are all the different pieces that we have, the tools that we have within this story. How could we, with each episode, thematically touch on that in some way? Both the beauty and the joy that can come out of like a story like Bill and Frank, and a fate worse than death when a man has to kill his own brother because he's turned. And then ultimately, the greater and greater sacrifices Joel has to make for Ellie, and likewise, what she's going through to protect him.
Both Mason and Druckmann have stated that The Last of Us is a story about what love can drive people to do. In the story, Joel is the man who does the quote horrible things to save Ellie. The horrible thing in question being the damnation of humanity. If he didn't damn humanity, one could not then state that Joel made a sacrifice or that he committed a horrible act. Mason goes on to state, in the podcast referenced earlier, that Joel is a utilitarian in the sense that he seeks to maximize Ellie's well-being over everyone else's, as opposed to Marlene's utilitarianism, which seeks to promote the general welfare of everyone else. Now, I wouldn't say that these are totally accurate uses of the term utilitarian, but they do fit the colloquial use of the term, so I'll let it pass.
At this point, he is utilitarian. Right. He is entirely about a simple utilitarian decision. It's just the opposite utilitarianism of Marlene's.
If Joel wasn't damning humanity, then you wouldn't be able to say that he chose Ellie over everyone else. And for Joel to fuck over the world, the Fireflies must be certainly able to produce a functional vaccine. Regardless of what you may believe, this is the actual intention of the narrative. The in-universe reality is that the Fireflies could have and would have saved the world with a vaccine if not for Joel. And it doesn't matter what you can point to, because this is a narrative necessity. And last time I checked, we're talking about a story and not real events. The ambiguity many speak of actually rests on the story's silence regarding whether or not Joel was right to damn humanity, not on whether or not the vaccine could actually be made and distributed. With all of that being said, I want to now focus your attention on the death of the author argument. The death of the author literary theory posits that the meaning of a text is not determined by the author's intention, but rather by the reader's interpretation. It's essentially a fancy way of saying my interpretation or headcanon is right because all interpretations are equal. This sort of reasoning is, without a doubt, based on circular reasoning. If one were to look at a story as a claim being made by the author, then one would essentially see the issue with interpreting a text without consideration for the author's own motives. If you make a claim, I can't then tell you what your claim is. Only you can determine your own claim or story. If I interpret your claim incorrectly, whether intentionally or unintentionally, I end up committing a straw man fallacy. The death of the author ruins the ability for any person to have an objective or reasonable discussion about a work of literature. It also robs the author of their own voice regarding a piece of art they made that is now being co-opted by people with zero involvement in the production of said product. Surely there are cases where one can interpret a work of literature on their own, but this has to be justified. Appealing to this subjectivist theory simply doesn't justify one's interpretation of a text when the author's intent and the narrative are actually quite clear. I'm sorry, what's that? You disagree? Well, you know what? That's fine. It's your right to be a moron. But I'll do you a favor and give you a clear example. Imagine you write a lengthy comment disagreeing with me. Then imagine me interpreting your comment as being racist when it actually isn't. If all interpretations are equal, and if your intent doesn't fucking matter, then there is no way for you to actually defend yourself from such a claim. Now imagine that instead of me doing this to a YouTube comment you wrote, envision that I've done this to a novel you recently wrote, a piece of literature that took you months to finish. How would you feel about that? If you did not intend your story to be open to multiple interpretations. It'd be one thing if your novel was full of contradictions, but imagine your novel being clear as day. How would you fucking feel? Are you getting my point now? If you don't by now, then there's really nothing I can do to save you from betraying your own intellect. All things being considered, the narrative only works if we presuppose that the Fireflies could have and would have produced and distributed a vaccine from Ellie's sacrifice. That is pretty much uncontestable at this point. With that said, I do now want to address some arguments that I know people will still be making in the comments section, despite what is so narratively obvious. For starters, many claim the Fireflies are too incompetent to make a vaccine. Some would say they're too incompetent to distribute it as well. Here is why these claims aren't as strong or as convincing as many seem to think that they are. The Fireflies' incompetence is a perception born from their inability to overcome Fedra in a nationwide conflict. Waging a war and vaccine production and distribution are two completely different fucking tasks. There is a false equivalency fallacy here that is being committed by many of you. Since waging war and making vaccines are different activities, it is possible to suck at one and be proficient or satisfactory at the other. Furthermore, it is even possible to be generally incompetent about most things while still being good at one specialization. Be that as it may, the very fact that the Fireflies can wage a nationwide war, despite losing it, is proof enough that they at least have the logistics and connections to move supplies across the United States effectively. Because if they weren't able to do that, how the fuck would they be fighting in multiple states? This would indicate that they could indeed distribute the vaccine. Now sure, Marlene lost a ton of men going to Utah from Boston, which indicates that the Fireflies may have difficulty delivering the vaccine across America. But so long as the vaccine is delivered, the rest doesn't fucking matter. And the fact that they've been conducting tests and experiments on infected persons long before Ellie's existence also shows us that they know enough about the fungus among us to determine whether or not a vaccine is possible from Ellie's spicy brain juice. So it isn't even that far-fetched to believe the Fireflies could produce and distribute a vaccine. But once we consider the narrative's reliance on this fact, the debate pretty much comes to a crashing halt because this is a work of fiction, not a real event. Now some would also argue that because modern society has collapsed and has been gone for like 20 plus years, that the vaccine would hence be a waste of effort. This argument aims to accept the vaccine's potential creation only to dismiss its impact in the attempt to justify Joel's actions. And you know what? This is frankly stupid reasoning. A vaccine would change the world. Period. The reason people are so shitty in The Last of Us is precisely because we as a species in-universe are at the very mercy of the cordyceps fungus. Without a vaccine, without a way to emancipate ourselves from this threat, which can body us with just a single spore, we are forced to rely on the brutal ethics of survival. The vaccine would cut these chains and allow us to finally reclaim our dominion over the Earth, thus eventually freeing us from the ethics of survival, which would in turn move us up the hierarchy of needs. It would also likely cause the Fireflies to see a resurgence in recruitment. Members of and even entire Fedra settlements might even join the Fireflies once the news breaks out. The vaccine would essentially be the magical MacGuffin that grants the underdog rebels their victory, and by the time the vaccine is distributed to many areas, it would eventually be replicated, thus ensuring that the Fireflies are no longer needed for its existence. After all, if Fedra is winning a war against the Fireflies, it must hence mean that they have more manpower, human capital, and general resources. If the Fireflies can make a vaccine, it stands to reasonably speculate that Fedra can replicate said vaccine. So no, ladies and gents, the vaccine would have fucking mattered. To argue otherwise is to argue that we never should have exited the Dark Ages, which, by the way, we did. Anyways, if you enjoy this sort of content and want to see more of it, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. I'm Captain Gold and hope to see you in my next Gold Standard video.